Hey, Forest Park Church. My name is Chris Sloan. I am the lead pastor of North Park Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I have been connected to Forest Park for a few years now. Initially, I first had an opportunity to go to Ecuador with your church when I worked in Kinston. And then Pastor Scott has become a really close friend and a mentor, a coach, someone I look to for advice, and just someone I respect so much. And so I love keeping up with your church and what you're doing. And also, the last 2 years, I've had the opportunity to go to Nicaragua with PD, and then also this year, Dr. Neil. And so I feel like I know your church well. I've had the opportunity to speak there before. And so love what you guys are doing in Elizabeth City. And I consider it a great honor to be able to share with you in the 21 days of fasting and prayer and the video devotions that you guys have going on. So, my assigned text today is John chapter 8, verses 34 through 36. It says, Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever, the son remains forever. So, if the son sets you free, you will be freed indeed." And so, some of the context here, Jesus is speaking to people, but the Pharisees are present. They're listening. They're wanting to find out a little bit more about Jesus, but also catch Jesus and what he's saying. And Pharisees devoted their entire life to following the law, to following not only the law, but the interpretation of the law. And so they were just so strict in everything that they did. And they were always looking for ways to find Jesus at fault. And so Jesus brings up this idea of slaves and being free and those in the house. And he mentions a house. And kind of the context here is during that time, sometimes people would sell themselves into being a servant to pay off a debt. And so if there was a debt that they could not pay, they would become a slave until that debt could be paid off. They could actually make money, save money, and purchase their freedom. But sometimes people had such a debt that they served until they died. And so slaves did not stay in the home forever, but a son was always welcome. And so Jesus is getting at a few different things. Obviously, he's talking about sin and how sin makes us a slave to its desires. When we sin, we think that we're giving into these desires of what we really want, but sin doesn't really give us what we want. It gives us what it wants us to want. But Jesus is also hinting at the Pharisees because they consider themselves sons of Abraham. And because of just what the culture and who they were, the culture that they were born into and the nation that they were born into, they just assumed that there's no way we can miss it. We are sons of Abraham. We have the genealogy, we have the credentials, we have the training, we have everything we need to be sons. And Jesus basically points out to the fact that yeah, maybe they're sons as far as the line in which they were born, but if they're living in sin, if they're missing the freedom that he offers, they're actually slaves and not sons. And the Pharisees get upset and they say, well, we've never been slaves, which is pretty interesting because they had been slaves in Egypt. They'd been slaves to the Babylonians. They'd been slaves to the Syrians, the Macedonians, the Persians. Some authors believe that maybe they were saying they've never, actually given in and worshipped some king or some man as if he was God. But there was a lot of pride involved, and they just believed that they were never slaves. But Jesus points out this idea that true freedom is really doing the things that God has designed us to do. Tim Keller gives this great illustration about freedom. He says a fish absorbs oxygen from water, not air. So it's free only if it's restricted to water. If a fish is freed from the river and put on the grass, its freedom to move and even live is destroyed. He says real freedom is finding the right restrictions, the ones you were designed for. And what I appreciate about that is we usually tend to define freedom as no rules, right? My kids would think freedom means you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, as much as you want. But what Keller argues is anytime we use freedom as a license to do anything without restrictions, we find ourselves in a really dangerous place, and it causes harm to us and it causes harm to others. And so what he says is we've got to find the right restrictions. We've got to find the right design. and the design of the grace that Jesus offers, the gospel, being living out that design that God has created us into. If we go all the way back to Genesis, we're to steward the earth and the things that God has given us. Our job is kind of like a tilted mirror to reflect God's the praise of the world back to God, but also reflect God's good order and stewardship to the world. And so we do that with our talents and abilities. And when we make a great meal, or we work hard at our job with integrity, or love our family well, or stand up for truth and fight against injustice, we're using our freedom in the right set of boundaries and restrictions that God has given us. But anytime we say that freedom means I can just do anything and everything I want, we're actually back to being a slave again. And so Jesus is offering us sonship. He's saying when we are under his grace, when we accept his truth, we are sons of his house, and we don't have to be worried about being kicked out or losing our place. It's only when we choose to sin that we live under bondage. And so we can walk in the freedom that Jesus gives. It's not an absence of restrictions, it's finding the right restrictions. You and I are free, and we're free indeed because of what Jesus has done on the cross. And so I want to remind you to look to the resources that Forest Park offers, and just know that we at North Park really appreciate your ministry, what you're doing. Again, Pastor Scott and Lana are incredible leaders, and you know that by now, but you really just have such a gift in them as your pastors. His wisdom, his teaching, both of them just do such an excellent job. Their heart for missions has had a huge impact on my wife Ashley and I, and so we're so grateful for Forest Park. We hope you have a great day as the 21 days of fasting is getting pretty close to being over. And so I know that Pastor Scott is going to take everybody who participated out for steak, big steak dinner on him. So have a great week, and we hope you do well. God bless.